You can support the production of this podcast and get access to an ad-free version presented in high-resolution audio at clarinet.com/support.
That's the ultimate goal, is to go on stage and you're having pure enjoyment and reacting to everything that's happening in real time. And because of that, that's why I am motivated to practice, so that I can have those moments where you're free of the technicalities and your body just takes over and your mind and spirit's able to be part of the moment.
Hi, I'm Sean Perrin, and you're listening to episode 90 of the Clarinet Podcast, the show where I discuss all that's new and neat with clarinet, with the neatest people in the industry. On today's episode of the show, I'm excited to be joined by Richie Hawley, who's a versatile and critically acclaimed artist who ranks among the most distinguished clarinetists of his generation. We talk about what it was like playing with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, his time currently teaching at Rice University, and also some really interesting stories, including what it was like getting kicked out of a lesson with Yehuda Gilad back in the day when he was studying with him. It happened to be, amazingly, his first clarinet teacher when he was really young, at the age of 9, I believe. And also he shares a fascinating story about his most memorable musical experience at the end of the podcast in the lightning round. This episode's almost like one of those clickbait articles. You got to listen all the way to the end to find out the amazing story, but I'll give you a preview now. He managed to go to a concert of conducted by Bernstein of one of his favorite pieces, Tchaik 6, so obviously quite exciting in itself, but he sat in front of none other than Michael Jackson, which is really amazing story, and I have no idea how this could have come up any other way than here on the Clarinet Podcast, where we get to hear some really, really interesting and personal and insightful stories shared from wonderful guests from all around the world. So thank you so much, Richie, for coming on the show and sharing all this amazing information and stories with the Clarinet audience. So I just have two quick announcements before we get started for today. The first one is I really want to apologize, especially to the Patreon backers, that there was no episode released during the month of July. I feel especially bad about that for those who are supporting, because you're supporting on good faith that I will take the time to produce this show. But unfortunately, whether or not I do produce the show, there still are costs associated every month. Now, granted, those really aren't your concern. It is kind of my concern, and I know that you're supporting so that I can produce the show. So again, I want to apologize for that, but I also want to provide a reason, if there is one that can be justifiable. And the reason is that my wife and I celebrated the birth of our first child, a daughter, on June 27th, 2018. And although it's been absolutely incredible in so many ways, those of you who are parents will understand it's also been immensely busy and has been quite an adjustment of scheduling and time management and those sorts of things. So I'm getting back to it now, and I really look forward to getting the whole bank of episodes that I've been storing up for months now back out into the world. And I've even got some new things planned. I'm hoping to do a series on like financial wellness for musicians and various things like that in the fall. And if you have any guest requests or anything like that, or any ideas, even just to say hi, I'd love it if you'd send me a message at feedback@clarinet.com. The second announcement sort of is related to the first one. It involves the book club, which you might think sort of just evaporated, but I had scheduled to talk to the author of Inner Game of Music 2 days after my daughter was born, so that was not the best idea. So we delayed that conversation. Hopefully we're going to connect a few weeks at the end of August here, and then that conversation will air sometime in September if all goes well. If you do have thoughts about the book, well, first of all, thank you for reading along. Thank you for taking the time to take part in the book club. It's not dead. It's still coming. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share a voicemail with me by heading to clarinet.com, scrolling down all the way to the bottom. There's a little contact section. You can click leave a voicemail, and you've got 90 seconds to tell me what you loved about the book, what you didn't love about it, how it's maybe changed your musical practicing, or anything like that. So looking forward to hearing from you, and please do share your thoughts. There's thousands of people listening to this show all over the world, but only several, per episode will take the time to actually get back to me. And I really do love to hear from everyone. It's so satisfying to know that, not only are you enjoying the content being produced, but also the books we're reading together and the stories that the artists are sharing. It's really great to just sort of interact with the audience. So again, feedback@clarinet.com. You can get in touch directly or leave me a voicemail by scrolling down to the bottom and clicking on the leave voicemail button. Today's episode of the show is brought to you in part by Dario Woodwinds and their new weekly trivia show called Don't Blow It. You can check it out every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, and if you know the right answers to the questions, you might even have the chance to win some amazing new gear. By the way, if you haven't had the chance to try out D'Addario's new reserve clarinet reeds, you're really in for a treat. They're using some amazing new technology and manufacturing techniques that are helping achieve super consistent results. These reeds are now available for E flat, B flat, and bass clarinet, and you can pick up a box at your local music store. Or, if you want to order online, you can head to clarinet.com/reeds and buy a box right now. So I'm here today with Richie Hawley. Richie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It's great to be here. I'm a fan of your show. I've got a car that just has a satellite subscription that's expired. So I've declined renewing it and have gotten into tons of podcasts.
Wow, this is hilarious. It's always funny to me to find out who's listening. I mean, I hear from, college-aged students a lot or high school-aged kids, but then I find out that, really big name players are listening all over the world too. So it's a really diverse audience. That's fascinating. What's your favorite episode been?
I really enjoyed the one about the Broadway shows because that's just a totally different world than what I'm familiar with. So that was pretty cool.
So speaking of career options and things that people do, you won your first orchestral job with the Cincinnati Symphony at the age of just 23. What was that like?
I had won Charleston Symphony when I graduated from Curtis, and that was in 1992. Charleston Symphony paid, at that time, principal clarinet was making $16,700, and there were 80 people at the audition. I couldn't believe it. I was delighted to have won that job, and I was at Curtis before, and all my colleagues were winning giant jobs. I was just delighted to have any job. It wasn't as big as my colleagues at the time, but I was determined to get something bigger at some point.
So some point, though, came a year later, though, did it not, with the Cincinnati job?
That's right. It was in the winter of the following year, 1993, and then I started in 1994.
Does it feel overwhelming at that age to start a job like that, or?
The most overwhelming part of starting a Cincinnati Symphony was having to learn so much music week after week after week, and having to have reeds that worked week after week for massive pieces. And I had been at Curtis where we had different orchestra works every week. And that was just like one piece, and you had nothing else to do but practice on that. And the amount of concerts that Cincinnati was playing then, and the amount of repertoire, it was dizzying and nauseating and intimidating. It was terrifying, frankly. But I was determined not to screw up.
So you mentioned the reeds specifically. Is there some sort of backstory there on how you sort of figured this out or started getting more consistent reeds?
Yeah, when I was in school, Donald Montanaro was my teacher, and he was incredible about teaching us about reeds and cane and the story of where your reed comes from. And I remember in my freshman year, I had a roommate, and she was Japanese, and she had these interesting Tupperware boxes that weren't like American Tupperware. They were Tupperware that kind of opened up on the side. And it was from Japan. And so I had a divider in it. So I went home for Christmas in 1988 at the age of 18, and I drilled holes in the divider. I took a carbon filter from the aquarium that I had, put it on one side, put a humidifier next to it, and then put my reeds on the other side. And I won't say that I invented that. I'm sure somebody else was doing it, but no one else was trying to preserve their humidity and maintain a stableness with their reeds at that time. That was not a normal thing.
So the carbon, what effect is that having? Is it some sort of sterilization, or is that actually holding the moisture?
Well, the carbon, I thought at that time, at the age of 18 and not being very scientific about it, I thought that's going to keep it from molding from the humidity. And I don't think it really kept it from molding, but I think it absorbed excess humidity. That was kind of my theory, and it seemed to work.
You actually have a blog post called "You're Only as Good as Your Reeds" that was recently published on your website. So this is obviously something that's sort of been an important element through your whole career.
Without a good reed, you might as well be playing on a plastic clarinet.
Keeping them nowadays, what do you use currently?
I use Japanese Tupperware. and I put
Still, you're still using it.
I still use it, but it's modified in the sense that I put I like the D'Addario reed holders that they've made recently, the ones that are in different colors. Those are fantastic, and I keep them in there with a humidipack, and obviously that's more recent technology than 1988 when I just had a sopping wet sponge in there.
Which percentage of those humidipacks do you use? Because I use 49 on my clarinet, and then for the reeds I think it's closer to 60, but there's a bunch available.
Bingo, that's exactly what I do. The same formula.
And so those things, like, do you find that they mold if they're kept with those in the case, or not really?
No, not at all. Those humidipacks, they remove excess humidity, and I think that's what's so great about those humidity packs is you put a reed in there and you've just played on it, right? And one thing Montanaro taught me is like once your reed warps, that's it. It's kind of game over. You can bring it back from the dead a little bit, but it's not going to be like Lazarus, you know? It's not that reed is not going to be as good as it once was once it warps. And you can flatten it, but it if you keep it from warping, it will always have a more pure and better sound. So what I like to do is you put the reed, when you're done playing, you put it back in its sleeve, and I put it in the humidity box. And of course, that reed is completely saturated, right, from playing.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the course of, I don't know how long it takes, it slowly comes down to that humidity of the box, which is, let's say, 60% or 59%. And it does it very gradually over time. It's not like leaving the reeds out like some people do to dry out. I see people do that, and they are the people that have more problems with their reeds than I do. People seem to think they play a reed and then they lie them out in the open for them to dry, and then they warp. I had a conversation with somebody that was doing this. I said, "Why are you doing that?" They said, "Well, I want them to dry." And I said, "Well, they're going to warp if you do that." And this individual said, "Yes, I want them to warp so that it gets it out of their system." I'm like, "Oh, man."
You know, I hear a lot of people talking about trying to find the perfect case that lets the reed dry flat. And I think the problem actually is the drying part. It doesn't need to dry. And John Mackey, who invented a product that's similar to kind of what we're talking about here, it's called the Rejuvenate. It lets the reeds kind of stay at a stable humidity. He did some scientific research, and one of the biggest things that breaks down cane is actually the wet dry process. So if you can sort of get the reeds stabilized, you're going to get a lot longer life and a lot better performance out of them. So I think you're really onto something.
Absolutely. I've found that just works incredibly well. And the key to having good reeds is just keeping them in a consistent humidity or dry environment, one that's pretty much the same.
So you've got quite an engaging blog there online and a really nice website. And I want to, first of all, thank you for that great website, because so many players I find don't have a good online presence and makes my job as an interviewer really hard.
This summer, the website will get redone, but it's going to have the same content.
Well, there's a lot of great content on there. And, you also have a wonderful YouTube channel. And I just wonder, let's say looking back when you first won that orchestral job, did you ever imagine this sort of like marketing and online presence would be necessary as a musician?
All I was concerned with back when I started my job in Cincinnati was just being prepared for the next week. There was no internet. There was no thought of video online. There was internet, but it was through AOL, and it was through a dial-up, connection.
Yeah.
And I even remember when YouTube came out, the very first thing I watched was a lion running and chasing somebody. And I thought, wow, this could be a great platform one of these days for video and audio. And it's really turned into that for a lot of musicians.
Absolutely. And I guess I didn't mean the internet as the only marketing tool, but I just imagine that playing in an orchestra, as little as 20, 30 years ago, and not to mention, 50 to 100 years ago, was a much different experience, or being a musician in general than it is today. There's so much sort of marketing and being sort of a figure in that way that's a part of it. Do you see that as a really important part of being a successful musician?
I think it's really important for the orchestral musicians of today not just to bury their heads in the sand and do their job. They have to be the leaders in the community to be showing what classical music is, what the orchestra is, and I loved how Cincinnati evolved from just being bread and butter orchestra, 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 pops, pops, orchestra, pops, youth concerts to really stepping out and being part of the community in new ways. I really have been impressed with how Cincinnati Symphony has evolved tremendously since 2008 and the big global financial meltdown. It's made Cincinnati Symphony to be one of the top orchestras in the United States in terms of income level and endowment level and attendance level. They're doing incredible things in Cincinnati.
That is fantastic. How, as an orchestral player, do you give the same energy and passion to the incredible masterworks, but also the pops concerts and things which a lot of people tend to not enjoy playing as much?
There was this myth that you would have a pops concert and people would come to the pops concert and that would bring them in and get them interested to coming to the orchestra. And they did a lot of surveys around 2000 and they discovered that the pops audience had no desire to ever go to a symphony orchestra concert, and the symphony orchestra audience had no desire to ever go to a pops concert. So the crossover concept really never ever took off anywhere in the United States. So when you realize that, and you realize that this pops program, which is just maybe let's say a musical night, right? You're doing all musicals. That this audience is still loving every minute of it, and having an audience that is appreciating what's going on stage is all you can ever ask for what we do in an orchestra.
Man, I love that. I've heard the exact same argument, and people sort of say that the pop shows are going to act as some sort of gateway performance to the bigger shows, but I guess that's kind of like saying that someone who goes and watches one rock band is going to be more likely to go to another's concert. Like, they're not necessarily connected.
That's
if you're
correct.
a fan of Pink Floyd, it doesn't necessarily mean you want to go see Katy Perry or whatever.
That's correct. The data shows that there's zero crossover, zero.
So I guess what you're saying is, why not embrace the fans that love the pop, and why not embrace the fans that love classical and serve both audiences?
True. And also realizing that the pops audience of now is not going to be the same as the pops audience of 30 years ago. And similarly,
Yeah.
I think the solution of just having a traveling movie going city to city and then the orchestra plays the charts, that doesn't really get people involved in music. It just sort of says, oh, here's a novel way to watch a movie.
Yeah, I've seen this before. They do it now with Harry Potter and a couple other films, and they'll sort of travel around and perform the music. It almost turns the the movie into sort of a musical type experience. It's a little bit odd. I haven't been to one, but I guess I have seen like Dracula played that way, but it was an odd experience. You're right.
Yeah, and I'm coming from the vantage point of Cincinnati, which has always had a very separate and brilliantly thoughtful pops brand that figures out what the audience wants and caters to that. Most orchestras don't have that history, and most orchestras don't have the ability to have a separate creative staff that tries to work out what is going to be a new and novel way to appeal to the pops audience or a new audience.
Yeah, I think that most orchestras, I can't speak directly, but I assume that they use that pops revenue to kind of fuel the rest of the season. They don't look at it as sort of two endeavors, and Cincinnati does have a much more clear division and great marketing behind that. So
yeah, it was cool. It was really great to be part of that music making machine.
So you mentioned studying with Donald Montanaro. Are there any other compelling stories about your time with him you'd like to share on the podcast?
Oh my God. I think just my time at Curtis, it was in very different than it is now. Now they've got this additional building down the street, which is new and impeccable. And the original building was this gorgeous old mansion. And I don't think many of the students practice there now. What was incredible was being in that building and feeling the pressures of the ghosts of your musical ancestors and seeing their pictures on the wall and having to live up to a standard that they dictated in that building from the start of the school.
It's so interesting you say that, because I always find that too about old spaces. I love thinking about the things that happened there and the people who walk through those walls. And anytime there's a new building, I always feel it's sort of absent. Like the space might be technically better, but it's never got the same character and energy.
Oh, I agree with you completely. And what is interesting is so much of the North American woodwind aesthetic was founded in Philadelphia in the late 30s and early 40s. And previously to that time, woodwind sections were very stylized from a German style or a French style. And there wasn't really what is the American woodwind style. And Tabito developed that at the Curtis Institute of Music, and there was really specific thoughts of sound and phrasing that permeated the Philadelphia Orchestra in those amazing years with Stokowski, and then with Ormandy, and then later with Muti. And during my time in the Curtis Institute of Music, the Philadelphia Orchestra was being led by this young 30-something guy, Riccardo Muti, and they were just kicking butt. It was one of the most amazing sounding woodwind sections and this lush string sound. It was inspirational to hear them every week.
That's amazing. And just to have the chance to interact with these people must have been incredible too. Let's step back a little bit further to when you first started studying. Your bio says you started at 9. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. My dad played the clarinet, so there was a clarinet in the house. So I wanted to play music, and that's the instrument that I knew how it kind of went together and what it sounded like, and so I was attracted to that. And my dad said, okay, well, he'll contact his old teacher, and maybe I might be able to study with him. And his teacher was Mitchell Lurie. So he looked up Mitchell Lurie in the phone book, and Mitchell answered the phone and said that he doesn't teach beginners. Of course, my dad at this point had no idea of the fabled and legendary life and musical career of Mitchell Lurie. And it was just a cold call. And Mitchell said, well, I don't take beginners, but I have a grad student that just moved here from Israel, and he needs some students. And his name was Yuda Gilad. And I was one of Yuda's first students as he was a student. Yuda taught me how to read music. I remember he taught me how to hold the clarinet. He kicked me out of my second lesson because I made a mistake that I'd made too many times. And he said, when you're principal clarinet of an orchestra, you cannot make the same mistake twice. And my lesson was over. And I was thinking, what's a principal clarinet? What's an orchestra? Why am I being fired from my lesson?
I love that he was trying to instill the responsibility of like a future career, even at the second lesson, though.
You know, I think it was really a very powerful message that he was always thinking about me and teaching me in the manner of someone that has to be performing, and not just, okay, learn how to play the clarinet, but how are you going to be a great performer? And similarly, back to what I was saying about Curtis, when we would go to these concerts and you'd see these people that were bigger than life leave the concerts wearing Armani suits and just having the world at their feet and going home, and then they're going to come back and do it again the next day. It was an inspirational target. And Yuda set me up for seeing that, and Donald Montanaro set me up. You know, this is the target. This is what you say you want to do. This is what it's like.
So I don't want to dwell on this, but I'm just interested at the age of 9, like what was learning the clarinet like at that point? I mean, I have a young student now and I'm trying to put myself in his shoes, but it's really hard for me because I started at 12 or 13.
It seemed really easy. So there was no challenge. I think at 9, you don't know what hard is, and you don't have an idea of what a pressure is. And that started to happen around 12 and 13 when I had some bigger concerts and more reality performing. But at 9, I was delighted playing 4 or 5 notes just with my left hand. That was joyful for me. So I felt very encouraged. Yuta made me feel incredibly talented and gifted just because I played 5 notes correctly. It was a really rewarding lesson experience, and he was an amazing teacher even from back then. He was a beacon of music making, and I was just so attracted to this, and I wanted to be able to think about music like he did and be able to feel the music like he did. So it was an amazing influence, and he made such a huge impression on me.
What you say there about the child's learning mindset, I mean, that's so interesting because I started a book club this month with Clarinet here, and the book I chose was The Inner Game of Music, but I just finished reading The Inner Game of Tennis first, actually, and one thing they talk about is sort of trying to rediscover this learning mindset of a child where you're not, super critical, and you are mindful of your accomplishments from a very real perspective, and I think that's such a great thing. Do you feel that still influences you today?
I think the way I perform music, that's the ultimate goal, is to go on stage and you're having pure enjoyment and reacting to everything that's happening in real time. And because of that, that's why I am motivated to practice, so that I can have those moments where you're free of the technicalities and your body just takes over and your mind and spirit is able to be part of the moment.
That's amazing. I love that. In 1988, you won a Presidential Scholar Award in a ceremony at the White House. Walk me through that day. What was that like? And did you actually get to meet President Reagan?
Yes, that was the culmination of the Arts Week, and that's a program that's founded by and run by the National Foundation for the Advancement of Arts. And that was a competition where you would go to Florida, and it was sort of in the middle of the year, like a getaway competition and music making camp, and I was one of the top prize winners for that. So the top prize winners then get nominated to be a presidential scholar, which is really mostly an academic award. But they take the top winners from the National Foundation for Advancement of the Arts high school competition, and they have them do a whole application and essay writing, and they look at their school grades, and they go into the mix with all of these top high school scholars. And so there is a very select, small pool of arts presidential scholars, artist, a poet, a couple musicians, dancer, and then we were alongside the academic presidential scholars, amazing high school students already working on different crazy physics and mathematics and chemical equations at that age. So it was a great honor just to be among them. The Arts Week for the Presidential Scholar was an awards week, and we had a concert we played at Kennedy Center, and we were also doing a lot of activities, meeting our senators and congressional representatives, and there was an award ceremony at the White House, and it was presented by Ronald Reagan. So it was very, very memorable for me. And Yuta came along, Yuta Galad, because he was my teacher, and they had a special award for him as well.
Wow, that's amazing. So did you actually receive the award in the White House?
It was in the Rose Garden, yeah.
Wow, that's so cool. Yeah, that's amazing. What a sort of life moment there. That's super fantastic.
It was a really wonderful week. It was incredibly memorable. And I'm glad that I got to do my performance on the very first day, so that the rest of the week was just all fun.
It sounds like the influence of your past teachers was just incredible on your life. What is the one takeaway or some life takeaways that you try to instill in your students?
Well, I left the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra 7 years ago to teach full-time at Rice. And I had never planned on leaving an orchestra just to teach. But when I came down to Rice and I saw the Shepherd School of Music and its ambiance, I was so impressed. And what made the biggest impact on me is it felt like a music festival all year round, except on a collegiate learning level. So I was realizing at that time that making music with your students was as important as just standing across the room and yelling at them to do this better or differently. And so I try to instill uh, with my students that I'm not a better musician than they are. I just have had more experience than they have, and I would like to just be a mentoring uh, teacher that can share my experience and help shepherd them to where their destiny may be.
So are you actually performing chamber music with your students? And
During the summer at Music Academy in the West, we do a lot of chamber music with the students, and they're not necessarily my students; they're other students, but the feeling is mutual with other studios during the summer. And at the Shepherd School of Music, it's very much the same way. We have these concerts called the Sharing the Spotlight, and it's where I'm the host or curator of a recital, and then I bring lots of different students, not just my own. And we play together and work together, and it's an amazing collaborative and mentoring role that I like to have here at Rice.
that's so smart, because I think back to two memories from my university days, and interestingly enough, these experiences probably taught me more than hours and hours of instruction would have. But there was one concert I played with a new music ensemble, and we had these two fantastic instructors. One was a pianist and one was a violinist, and we were really short on people, so they decided to play in on a couple of the pieces for the concert with us. And just watching them interact and watching them perform, and it was like, oh, that's how it's done. And it was such a wake up moment as a young player. So I think that's fantastic.
Oh, for sure. There's nothing like seeing the person that is telling you what to do. It's nothing like seeing that person across the stage from you or sitting next to them. And yeah, it's not that just that teacher is delivering the goods, but they're showing what the word more means. What is really loud? What is really soft? What is that level of expression that this person was telling me to do? I hear it. I hear this what he or she is doing across the stage. Powerful.
And I think the across the stage part is so important, because there's a total difference between, just a faculty recital and actually sitting down and playing chamber music with your instructors in this way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's transformative. Wonderfully.
How large is your studio?
8 students, 8 clarinet students.
Oh, that's quite a modest size, actually. That's wonderful. So it must be a lot of one-on-one attention then.
Yeah, it's why I was attracted to this school. It's very much like a music festival year round. I'm there interacting more than just a lesson.
Well, I hear of some of these schools in the States, and I'm from Canada, so things are much smaller up here, but I do hear of 30 to 60 students in a studio, so I'm really surprised and impressed by that.
Yeah, well, I think that can work too, but nothing is as good as being around your teacher several days a week in multiple musical situations, not just in a lesson.
You've been praised for having a seamless tone that so many clarinetists long for, but few can achieve, by the Cincinnati Enquirer. What is the secret, and how do you instill your sense of the clarinet's tone and sound in your students?
Well, I attribute that to a combination of what I learned from Yuda Galad and from Donald Montanaro. Yuda really was a huge influence on singing through the instrument, getting the instrument to be like your voice, and combined with tremendous amount of work on just air production. So by the time I was 13 or 14, using a whole lot of air was second nature. The next level in my development was when I went to Curtis, and Montanaro, for better or for worse, I like to think it was one of the greatest things in my life, but at the time it felt miserable. Donald Montanaro had me just doing intervals for 3 months, intervals and scales, really slowly, to try to connect the notes and play between the notes. And the legato that he had, it was like candy. It was candy I wanted. I would hear him demonstrate, and it would be the smoothest sound. And I wanted it so much. And I hated having to just play intervals, but I knew that I was getting better and better. So getting that smooth sound and getting that legato was just from having Donald Montanaro demonstrate what that really sounds like, and then helping me to achieve that just with basic intervals and scales.
And so, to what extent do you think that you mentioned reeds being like of pivotal importance?
Yes.
Obviously, we're talking about now the airflow and the person element of it, but do you think that the gear makes the player, or does the player make the gear? I know it's kind of a broad question, but in this context,
I think that a great reed is more essential than anything. Second to that is having that reed handshake and partner with the mouthpiece. And it's not as simple as just saying, all right, I should be playing on a 3.5 reed. Well, what variety of reed, what model of reed, what style mouthpiece you're playing on? I mean, there's more to it than just getting a good reed. It's getting that handshake. Obviously, having great air support is better, more important than just buying the best new gadget gizmo ligature mouthpiece. Without good air support, you can't do anything.
So reed, air support, those are the two kind of pinnacle.
I think having the right reed, the right strength is essential. Having a reed that responds is essential. I would rather have a reed that responds than the one that has the most beautiful sound ever. Because when that conductor gives that downbeat, you've got to be playing that spot, you know? Of course you want the reed that responds and has a great sound, but for me, having that response is the most essential thing. But for example, what are you going to do when you got to play the Cuckoos in Mahler 1 at the very first page and your reed doesn't respond? You can't adjust your reed. You can't wave a sign to the audience and say, my reed's no good. This reed is bad. Please forgive me because the Cuckoo's sick today. No, everyone wants to hear those Cuckoos.
Yeah. It's not a forgivable thing.
No, there's no, you've got to have that response. And, ideally you have a great responding reed and that has a great sound. But I get back to what Yuta taught me, which is having that great air support. Because if you have a really great air production and great air support, you can sometimes get by with a less than perfect reed.
I want to ask about some of your new videos on the YouTube channel here. You have one up of an Ervo Parrot piece called Fratres.
Yes.
And it's a great performance, by the way. But it says that it's produced by you. So are you kind of moving into video production now as well? Or?
Oh, I've done video production for ages. It's a spinoff. I had a photo business that I ran in Fiji for a couple years. And
oh, very cool.
And then when YouTube started taking off, I used my knowledge of photography into going into producing classical music videos for a string quartet, and then for some friends, and then for myself. And the parrot video that's on my YouTube channel is actually from an ensemble that we have called the Rogue Ensemble, and it's kind of still in its fledgling stages and getting off the ground. But I wanted to throw that on my own YouTube channel because that was a production that I was very, very proud of. The audio and recording that, and then the whole editing and producing the video and filming it too.
So we've got orchestral player, chamber musician, professional educator, video producer, photographer. What else can you do?
I've since I've moved to Texas, I've gotten into smoking meat and vegetables. Yep, I've got a smoker, and that's my true culinary hobby, is sitting in the back, tending the fire of the smoker, even though it's a pellet smoker, just adjusting it and getting everything right. I love it. Really good. I love cooking.
Maybe we can expect smoked reeds in the future.
Haha. If that could make them better, I'll always do that. I'll tell you this. This is what I love about D'Addario, is that they listen. And if I were to say, hey, I did this experiment with my reeds and I ran them through the smoker and it made them better, they would look into that. And that's not just because I'm an artist. They really listen. I switched from another brand And part of the reason that I switched was that I was finding some issues or some things I knew could make their reads better. And there was nobody listening to me. And I just wanted to share my knowledge and experience, and there wasn't an ear that said, please tell us, let's see what we can do, because you seem to know what you're talking about. And that just never happened. And Daddario reached out and they said, what do you think of this? How could this be better? And I was seeing what Daddario was doing with other parts of the musical landscape, not just with woodwinds, but with guitar strings and percussion. And it was clear to me that Daddario was an innovative company that wanted to make musicians' lives better.
Which strength of reed and which of their styles are you playing on?
I use the Reserve Classic, and I play on the 3.5 reed. And on my mouthpiece, I'm actually in the middle of developing with them a new mouthpiece. We're almost to the beta test phase. It's juicy. It's going to be a game changer.
Can you share any hints about what that might be like?
I can. I will tell you this much. What is interesting has been interesting in the development of this mouthpiece is traditionally when people make a mouthpiece, they say, "Here's the blank. Let's get a facing, and let's try this facing, that facing." And they do it by hand and then do it by machine or whatever. What we did is we started with a general facing that would work with the 3.5 reed. And then we started experimenting with internals in a way and in a manner that you could never do with a molded mouthpiece. And with a molded mouthpiece, which is like most mouthpieces are molded out of a mold, like a Zinner blank is a molded mouthpiece. It's very different than one that is machined by a CNC machine, which is what Daddario does. So we are in the middle of finalizing some dimension changes on the inside, and we're talking, I get a sample where there's 4 mouthpieces, and the difference of one's mysterious spot on the inside is 0.004 or 0.005 or 0.006. I mean, these microscopic numbers, like the thickness of a piece of paper, where we can add material or take away material with the design process. So this is a game changer mouthpiece because we started with the basic facing, and then we're doing internals, more internals, and we're about done with that and going to revisit the facing to just get it all cinched up and perfect.
Another example of, technology and music kind of working hand in hand to improve things and allow, further musical expression. I think that's just fantastic.
It's incredible being able to work with the design team of engineers with Daddario, because a lot of them have an aerospace machining background, and they approach a problem so much differently than a musician. And I can say, I need the sound to be reflecting off this part of the baffle onto this part of the ramp in a different manner. And we scratch our heads, and they come up with a solution for this. And so we changed the shape of the internals, thing after thing, just microscopically. And it's incredible what a difference in the sound it makes. Incredible. Even it's obvious, you're changing how the sound is vibrating, the cathedral that sound first gets its vibration to sing in, and it's been a tremendously educational and wonderful experience for me.
Definitely look forward to trying that mouthpiece. Is there a time frame on its release, and will it be a signature model? Like, we'll have your name on it?
No, I don't. I think I can honestly say the last thing I would ever want is a Richie Hawley mouthpiece, because this mouthpiece is a mouthpiece that is not about me. It's about what I believe is needed in the market. A mouthpiece that responds like a very close-facing mouthpiece, but that has the depth of sound of a more open mouthpiece. And I know, and we have it, we've got it almost finished. You can have that sort of response from an open mouthpiece. You don't have to have an open mouthpiece that feels like you're pushing a huge amount of air just to get some response.
I think this is a relatively new but very welcome phenomenon. A lot of players, myself included, have gone towards more open mouthpieces and slightly softer reeds. But the previous generation, and my teacher especially, I remember him pushing me towards very closed mouthpieces, very, very hard reeds, and it was a lot of work just to get a sound.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think it's great that the freedom to play is taking precedence over that sort of tension.
My first mouthpiece was a Mitchell-Lurie mouthpiece, and ironically made by Rico back in the day. And it was a very, very open mouthpiece, and a very resistant mouthpiece. It had a lovely, rich sound, but boy, it was impossible to get it to respond well. And I went to Curtis, and right away I was switched onto a very close-facing mouthpiece and a Blue Box Van Doren 3.5 reed. And boy, I struggled with the reeds and I struggled with the mouthpiece, but it really taught me a lot and got a sound into my ear that was with a very centered, responsive core. So when I left Curtis, I played on a close-facing mouthpiece on my Henry Shedville for most of my time in the orchestra. And towards the end, I switched to an open mouthpiece and have really been experimenting over the last decade with various open mouthpieces, and now finally have dialed in exactly what I am looking for in a open mouthpiece. I hear what you're saying. I think so many people have changed their perspective and are moving towards an open mouthpiece and don't know what to play on. There are some things that have a wonderful sound, but they're inflexible. And that's what I loved about a closed-facing mouthpiece. It's responsive and it's flexible. Open mouthpieces are less responsive traditionally and less flexible, but this mouthpiece is going to be a combination of both.
Well, I definitely look forward to trying that out, and thank you for sharing those amazing information about that on the podcast here.
Oh, I'm excited for everyone to get their hands on this. We did an alpha test, and that came back very, very positive, and the changes that we made based upon what everybody needed to have changed, we've achieved all those things, and we're getting ready to send out the beta test very soon.
Thanks for sharing those details about that mouthpiece. I definitely look forward to trying it out. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back for the lightning round. I'd like to take a moment to thank the 33 backers we have on Patreon who are currently supporting the show so that thousands of other clarinetists all around the world can listen for free. Now, if you're not in a position where you're currently supporting the show on Patreon, that's okay. I do appreciate the fact that many people do want to listen for free, and I think many people who, for example, can't afford it should have the option to listen for free, absolutely. But I'd like you to do two things this week. Now, the first thing is, as soon as you get to your next rehearsal, your hand touches your clarinet, I want the first thought to pop in your head to be, is there anyone around here that I could tell about the Clarinet podcast? Now, of course, I'm talking about clarinet players. Don't walk up to the percussion section and start singing the praises about the Clarinet podcast, because honestly, they're probably not going to want to listen. But I know that there's a lot of clarinet players out there in the world who probably aren't listening, but probably could get value from the show. And honestly, building the audience worldwide, getting to as many clarinet players as possible, is one of the ultimate goals of this, so that these stories that are being told on here can sort of reach the ultimate realization, which would just be so great. But the second thing is, I want you to think about the last time you took a clarinet lesson and what the cost of that lesson was and the value that you sort of gleaned from that lesson. I'm assuming that you paid $50 to $100 for the lesson, and you probably got a ton of value because your teacher's probably amazing and you're probably studying at a fantastic facility and all those great things. But Clarinet comes on 2 to 4 times a month for 1 to 2 hours, right? What is the value of those 2 to 4 or 8 hours of content in your life as a clarinet player? And is that content worth as much as a single minute of lessons with your teacher? Now, I'm willing to concede that your teacher might be absolutely amazing, and there's no way that 8 or 10 or 50 hours of clarinet could even compete with a single minute of their lessons. But we've had some of the greatest clarinet players in the world on this show. Corrado Giuffretti, Martin Frost, Ricardo Morales, Richie Hawley today. I believe that there's enough value in here that clarinetists listening all over the world can get at least $1 to $2 of value per month and would feel comfortable contributing that amount of money towards the production of the podcast to ensure that I can do it into the future. So anyways, I want you to think about that. What is the value of this podcast in your life as a clarinetist? Does it compete with 1 to 2 minutes of your teacher's time? And would you be willing to support the show at that level? As a thank you for your support, you'll get access to an ad-free, high-resolution version of the podcast, which I call the Gold Edition, and you can do this at clarinet.com/support. Thanks so much, and let's get on to the lightning round with Richie Hawley. So what is something that you do every day that you feel contributes most to your success?
I check my reeds and I get rid of the ones that are old and crappy.
Ooh, that's the hard part. I have a big box of reed graveyard. I guess you don't have that?
My reed graveyard is, no, they don't even stay around. My reed shifts will go in the trash once they've expired.
You're stronger than I. What is your all-time favorite can't live without clarinet accessory? What is your all-time favorite can't live without clarinet accessory?
My Mark Jacoby custom number 7 barrel.
If you could redo any aspect of your musical career, which would it be and why?
I would reattend Pacific Music Festival when I went. It was the first year of Pacific Music Festival, and let's just say I was rather hot-headed then. I think I have a cooler brain for stressful situations now.
What is one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were 21?
I wish I knew how much fun it is to practice.
Oh, I love that. What piece of music, album, or performance changed your life most profoundly?
Hearing Tchaikovsky 6 when I was 15, played by the New York Philharmonic in Royce Hall with Leonard Bernstein conducting, and sitting behind me was Michael Jackson.
Whoa. So we got to stop here for a second. That's that's one of the craziest answers ever. So Michael Jackson was just sitting right behind you and you're watching a concert with Bernstein?
Yeah, well, I loved Tchaikovsky 6 at this time, and I was a major Bernstein fan and a huge New York Philharmonic fan because I was watching them on TV on the weekends when they had their live shows. And the second half, this was for the second half specifically, the concertmaster came out, then tuned the orchestra, then Bernstein came out, and then there is all this like kind of hubbub and shh and wait. And they waited till everybody, including Bernstein, was in place. And then Michael Jackson came and sat down behind my dad and I, and then the concert started. And it was so good. It was one of the most amazing performances of Tchaikovsky 6 I've ever heard.
So that was like a culmination of amazing things then. Just the situation was surreal and the music was surreal and everything just at once.
All surreal. And the best thing is you have the entire orchestra and Bernstein like turning around and looking to see Michael Jackson walking in Royce Hall at UCLA.
That's just wow. That's why I love this lightning round. I don't know how I would have drawn that answer out of you any other way.
True.
That's amazing. So, before that, much before, what was your first musical memory?
My first musical memory was when I was very, very little, maybe 2 or 3. My daycare was in a dance studio. My mom was a professional ballet dancer, and they had live pianists that would do the rehearsals. So she would bring me as a toddler, and I'd sit next to the piano, and like kind of where the page turner would be sitting. And I remember hearing Chopin and Bach and Chopin and Bach and Chopin and Bach over and over and over again. I could recognize it on the radio, even at that age.
What is a book that you'd recommend to the clarinet audience?
Oh, Breathology.
Oh, wow.
I make all my students at Rice buy that book, and I'm trying to spread the word. You know Erin Fung?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, I think she stole my copy of it, but it's an amazing book. You get it on Amazon. It's usually sold out. It'll change the way you think of how you breathe.
Who's it by?
Oh, a name I cannot pronounce.
But it's readily available on Amazon or something like that.
Yes, and I got turned on to this because when I was working in Fiji, I would free dive for recreation in addition, and the people I was working with, they were amazing spear fishermen, and they could hold their breath for 2 minutes. And I learned a lot of techniques then, and heard about this book, Breathology. So it was a life-changing experience, and that book really encapsulates a lot of the philosophies.
That's amazing. I'll have to check it out. Maybe I'll add it to the Clarinet Book Club reading list here.
It's so good. It is such a great book.
Well, thank you, Richie, so much for coming on the show today. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we depart?
Oh, I don't know. Follow me on Instagram. You could see my my crazy French bulldog and her crazy antics. She's a sweetie. And
what's your handle?
Richie Hawley on Instagram.
Just at Richie Hawley?
Just Richie Hawley. And subscribe to my YouTube channel, because there's at the end of the summer a couple of new vlogs going to be coming out that I've been working on. One about Mark Jacoby, and the other one about the development of this new mouthpiece.
And you mentioned too, your website's going to get a little bit of a revamp, so you can find that at richiehawley.com, and I'll put a link to everything we talked about today in the show notes. So thank you so much, Richie, for coming on the podcast, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Clarinet Podcast. Show notes can be found at clarinet.com/90. That's the number 90. Be sure to hit subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever you happen to be listening. That helps new listeners discover the show. And also, I want to remind you to join the email mailing list for Clarinet. You can do this by going to clarinet.com, scrolling down all the way to the bottom, entering your email address, and clicking on subscribe. This way you'll get access to not only episodes as they're released, but also special coupons and other offers and announcements that I send out about 4 to 6 times a month through that mailing list. The Clarinet Podcast is brought to you by the backers on Patreon. Thank you so much to all who support the show. And it's also brought to you in part by D'Addario Woodwinds. Don't forget to check out their new Don't Blow It trivia show by following them on Instagram. You can find a link to this at clarinet.com in the menu bar. Also, don't forget to try their new reserve clarinet reeds at your local music store, or you can pick up a box online by heading to clarinet.com/reeds. I'd also like to thank Megan Taylor, who's been doing the copywriting for the Clarinet Podcast, and Brian Shaples, who's been doing most of our editing, although I did get my hands dirty, so to speak, and edit today's episode myself. The Clarinet Podcast is produced in Calgary, Alberta, Canada by me, Sean Perrin, and the music at the start and end of the show is performed by Michael Lowenstern. Thank you so much, Michael, for letting us use that music on the show. And that's it for today's episode. I look forward to seeing you next time for more of what's new and neat for clarinet on the Clarinet Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.